científicos modernos han tratado de despojar a Dios de su calor, de su afecto personal por la humanidad y su simpatía por sus criaturas.
Hello, everyone. To everyone's surprise, this is the first episode of the podcast that we're recording in English, and I'm thrilled and honored to have my first guest is the amazing David Bell, and I'll let him talk a little bit more about himself in a little bit. But yeah, we're gonna be recording and making available episodes in English so that this narrative, um, this language of that is emerging from this space, from this border, from this liminal faith that we're building here, it's happening in English, in Spanglish, in Spanish, and that we're building this together as a movement. So David, do you want to talk a little bit about yourself, and then we'll share with folks what is the most recent thing that we're working on together, and inviting folks to participate in.
Yeah, great to be with you, Pedro, and I look forward to our time together today. A little bit about me is my folks. I'm son of Robert Bell and Catherine Bell. They come out of West Texas, and out of the U.S. Depression in the 30s, which formed a lot of who they were, and in turn, formed a little bit of who I was, having never been a part of that. I think that it's just a piece of life that often gets left behind, when we talk about ourselves, of those forming pieces of what formed our parents so much. But the bottom line is I grew up in Southern California, in a rural area that was sagebrush and manzanita canyons. That a place that in today's environment, you can understand the folks who are there today have it much worse, a much higher population, and yet still dry stuff that when fires get going, they just don't stop. But that's all to say that I come out of that and end up in Washington State, directing the Yakima Christian Mission, one of disciples for historical homeland ministries, and doing that. And that has changed a lot in the last 23 years that I've been doing that. But out of that comes primarily today is a deep interest in Indigenous justice and how that fits in and around us, certainly within the churches, and how that plays off, recognizing that for those of us who find ourselves on U.S. soil, is that this is a home to a lot of folks who have been here from time immemorial, and so often still in today's context gets left out of the conversation. Certainly in the church, I think we do a little bit better, but when we really look at it socially, they just disappear. And I think that's not only from border to border, but that's the continent, from Alaska, Canada to South America, is that our Indigenous people often just get left out of the conversation, because colonizing was just so defining of what went on across all of these borders. So that's where I settle in today. More than anything else is trying to figure out how do we raise better awareness around Indigenous justice in the United States and Canada in particular.
Yes, and interestingly enough, we I remember you visiting Tucson, and we drove down to the Nogales, and as we were walking downtown Nogales in Mexico and looking at the wall, there were so many connections that you were, as I was describing what was happening here and we were talking about theology, you were making so many connections with your work on indigenous justice, and how how to put it in words, how the foundation is there, and it's been there from the foundation of the country and the taking over the land to basically do for all of these injustices to happen. But we'll get there in a minute. I had an introduction and now I lost it. I guess we can just start talking about it. But okay, I got it now. So I was born I was born and raised pretty much in this land called the Sonoran Desert. It's very large, extended piece of territory, and so this desert, this land, it's never been foreign to me. I grew up under this hot sun, hot weather, nourished by the water, the pitaya, the cholla, the saguaro, all of these ecosystem. And so when I moved from Mexico to the United States, we can call it, I didn't migrate. When I crossed that border to live permanently in the United States, it's a common question for folks to say, where are you from? When they hear your accent, folks here in the States will say, where are you from? And that was always an interesting question for me, because I wanted to say I'm from here. Like this is the land I've known all of my life. But just to be polite, not create an uncomfortable moment, obviously I would say, oh, I'm from here. I would even go in detail as to how many kilometers are from where we are standing right now to where I am from in Mexico, and the amount of hours it takes you driving over there. And gosh, it's just awkward answers to explain to people that I'm not as foreign as I appear to you. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
But so doing ministry here, I would go out with some of the one of the humanitarians, most active humanitarian groups here in the area, and searches to look for migrants who were abandoned in the desert, out in the desert, and they were in distress and in danger, really, of losing their lives. And one occasion we encountered a migrant that was just standing on the side of the road, waiting to be found by Border Patrol, because that's a survival instinct. Rather be arrested than be lost in the desert and die there alone. So we found him on the side of the road, and the group of volunteers dialed the border patrol number, and we're just there, giving him water, a little bit of food. The other two volunteers were these lovely white ladies, elderly white ladies, and then there's me and the other migrant. And the two ladies were wearing shirts that identify them as part of this humanitarian group, and I was just in my regular clothes, and then the migrant, and we both had backpacks. And so there was this moment for me of realizing, like, wait a second, the border patrol is going to arrive here, and there's two Mexican-looking guys and two white ladies. How are they going to know? Are they going to ask questions? Like, there was just this moment of me starting to get nervous and stressed about it. So I asked the ladies, do you have another shirt that I can wear so that I can identify as this is the person that you're going to take, not me? And then they provided me with a small size shirt, and I am not a small person. But I put it on anyway, so I look very awkwardly, like a tamal mal amarrado, we say in Mexico, like just tied. And anyway, that experience made me realize that it was this moment for me of, there's one, what am I doing here? Like, is this the way for me to do justice, to engage in this work? Or how does that look from my skin? How does social justice work, compassionate work, solidarity looks like me as someone that has been identified as a migrant, that is constantly being asked this question, where are you from? Is it my story the same as that person that we found out in the desert? Or it doesn't matter? Am I perceived, are we perceived with having the same migration story? And so then I found this creation story by a Tohono O'odham girl. And there, in this creation story, she talks about Elder Brother Itoy. Elder Brother Itoy creating everything that is needed for you O'odham people to survive. And then she starts describing geographically that world that Elder Brother Itoy created, where everything that you needed to live on this earth is there for you. And she mentions Hermosillo, and then she mentions the Gulf of California, the salt banks of the Gulf of California. Then she mentions the Salt River and the Saguaro, and she goes from north to south, as far south as my hometown, and east to the Gulf of California, and west to the San Pedro River, and I'm sorry, east to the San Pedro River, and west to the Gulf of California. And the land I knew as a child, she is describing it in beautiful poetic prose, in beautiful words, how Elder Brother Itoy, like, created these geographical boundaries that are that nature, like the landscape, the what is the word I'm trying to find? The ecosystem created that place for you to call home. And every season provides you with whatever you need. And for me, it was this piece of the thing that we rarely talked about when we talk about the border is the stealing of land from the indigenous communities that have been the stewards, the inhabitants, the home for centuries, for millennia of indigenous desert people, the autumn people, and how it has dramatically changed life and culture, and all this land. It involves rites of passage, their indigenous spirituality, prayer, so many things that have been disrupted by the taking over the land. Not even to mention, and we haven't mentioned yet, the ecological damage to this fragile to this land, to this fragile ecosystem that we call the Sonoran Desert. That was a very long presentation on my part, but let me stop there and hear some of your thoughts on that.
Right. Well, I think that becomes a core piece when you talk about Tohono O'odham story that's like that. That reminds you that folks have been around for a long time, but long enough to have stories, to have to create myths, to truth, and recognizing that people come up and out of the land, and I think that's what so much gets lost today because of often, how we I'm going to say how we talk about the doctrine of discovery and how that's influence, but the influence of it, the crime, the evil piece is like we can talk about the stealing of land, we can talk about colonization, we can talk about conquering, we can talk about all of that, but the core piece that gets lost is the spirituality of the landscape. And so when you tell that story, is that which is of creation gets lost in the midst of it because to use the short term, the doctrine of discovery, that is all about empire building, all about bringing power to empire and to bring profit to business, which in turns bring power to empire, right? Is to not pay attention to the spirituality of the landscape. So when you talk about the salt banks of the
Gulf of California.
The Gulf of California.
It's just it has two names. One is the Sea of Cortez. But if you don't want to
right, but
deconstruct the land, that piece of
right, exactly,
of discovery, it's the Gulf of California.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point of it, right? The Sea of Cortez is empire building. It is saying that because there's nothing about what was before, what anybody would have called it before. and so it becomes a part of the empire. And so there's no reason to think about the Gulf itself having a spirituality to it, which means it's not about having the salt banks having its own spirituality, and a spirituality that is tied to humans, that right, yeah, that you literally can't live without the salt, that it becomes a part of a creation story because folks recognize we have to make these journeys to get to salt, because without it,
Oh gosh.
and the more that you are a people of a dry land like the Sonoran, is that the more important it becomes. So, because right, where again, where I grew up was a high desert, so a little different.
Mhm.
But the thing is water is incredibly important, but you can have all the water you want, but if you don't have the soil of the land, salt, you die just as well. You've got to have it both. That you have to have the soil of the land as well as the water for survival, and thus, you end up with a creation story that's in that way. But more than anything, is the spirituality of the
Yes.
people and the land become one. And when we become a folks of the doctrine of empire building and profit, we just lose it. So so the thing is, it's to me, it's again that you look at this wonderful landscape out where you are, from Tucson all the way into Mexico, but then we look at the copper mines, and it becomes so important to us, especially today in a technological world, that we choose not to think about what happens to the land itself and whatever spirituality is built into that land, and the plants and the animals that are a part of that. So for me, when you talk about it, it moves me to a place of recognizing that so much what's going on is creating out of empire building, of creating a labeling system that separates us literally from creation, from nature, from nativity, right?
Okay.
That we are the empire defines who we are and gives us labels, so that we no longer pay attention to one another as brothers and sisters, as humans, are our brothers and sisters who are also the plants, the sorrows, and the coyotes of the landscape.
Okay, Dave. Let's pause there, because you touched on, I mean, this is huge. Maybe for me, I hope folks will connect with this piece as well. But what you just said, let's rewind and say it again. This piece of empire building, the money-making machine, I'm gonna call it in my words. This piece of just profit making for profits, profit making for power's sake. It robs us from our spirituality, from our connection to the things that we used to take as that are holy, that are sacred. And when we're robbed from our souls, from that soul, then everything else is for the taking. Can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, this is where folks are better than me. Repeating what I say, I'm going, what did I
know.
say?
It happens all the time.
But I think the thing for me is is that what gets stolen from us, you know, in ancient peoples, right? So I don't know your story, but I certainly know some Pueblo stories, Navajo stories, and Chinese stories of creation stories of which continually speaks, and right in the Hebrew story as well, speaks of people rising up out of the land, and and that's what gets lost. We forget that we're part of the land, that you know that our very beings, you know, are mostly water, and what's not is minerals, and we are and so we can talk about the myth stories and say whether you know that's a myth and this type of thing, but we know we're water and dirt.
Yeah.
We know that that's from which we came.
Mm-hmm.
And the prophet piece that's all around us to say, don't remember that. Because
Okay.
that reminds you, if you remember it, then you know you are spiritually tied to that land in which you were birthed. And through heritage, you are tied to the land in which your parents and your parents were birthed, which means for many people, especially who find themselves within the United States today, they're literally a part of lands from around the world. I would argue that we have time that that's true for all of us.
Yeah.
That we know that we've seen dust and dirt from volcanoes and other things float all around the world. And that when we talk about a particular landscape, is we can say this is where we're from. This is so much of who we are. And my parents were, you know, West Texas folks, and that you know, birthed and born there. They know that land, that type thing, and but that's a part of. But they're a part of something prior to that,
Yeah.
and they're a part of something after that. Which right creates a different dialogue of folks who are in a place from time immemorial to folks who are like me who come from different places, and yet the more we know we're tied to the land,
Yeah.
the more we know that when I have conversations with Joanne here, and this particular landscape is going, when the wind blows, and a very basic piece of the Washat religion here, when the wind blows and the dust is in the air and you get dust in your eyes, is that you know you have your ancestors in your eyes.
Yeah.
The thing is that when we tie ourselves back to the land, is that Joanne's ancestors are in my eyes as well as her own.
Yeah.
And that should matter to me.
And so the thing is, you know, thinking about these pieces of learning the stories of the land. So going back to this piece of spirituality, and the salt bags, one of the rites of passages for the youth and in these lands, it was to run. They were literally called salt pilgrimages, where the youth would run from the Guadalupe Valley, from all this area of the desert, run down to the Gulf of California, to the salt banks, to get salt and bring that back to the communities. And the importance of that I mean, it's a piece. It was just it's part of the spirituality of the people of the land, because he was, I think, in part is because it was vital to the survival of the community, because without that salt you cannot preserve um, the food, the without refrigeration, what you have to preserve food and others, um, and other basic needs for your community, it's where those um, rocks, those blocks of salt that the youth would bring. And so I'm gonna try to make a weird um, parallel connection correlation here. I always found interesting that the folks that came from England and arrived at the shores of Plymouth. Plymouth. How do you pronounce it?
Plymouth?
Plymouth.
Always remember, I have a lot of folks who say, David, you need to get your pronunciation better. So that could even be wrong.
I'm sure yours is more accurate than me. Plymouth. They're pilgrims, because somehow their Christian faith is tied to their journey, right?
Mhm.
But migrants coming from the southern border, they're they're migrants. It's a journey of migration. It's not a pilgrimage, because there's no spirituality attached to that. And so those salt pilgrimages, how these young folks would run, literally run from here, like from this desert all the way down to the Gulf to get salt and then bring it back to their communities. It's a spiritual because it's tied to life of everybody. And like, this migration crisis is no different than that. People are leaving their land. People have to leave their homelands, their homes, their farms, their family, so that they can come here and get what is vital for life, and then send it back home to the survival and subsistence of their community. And when you go out to the desert and walk some of the trails, um, some of the paths where migrants have walked, it's filled with symbols of faith, of spirituality, of prayers, of images, of embroidering and all kinds of symbolism that tells you about people bringing their faith, that journey being also filled with faith and spirituality. And all this desert now becoming almost like this huge altar where it's not just journey, but it's people's faith being formed. And I can inevitably think of the Hebrew scriptures and God making a people, like, or people finding God in the midst of that journey. Who else do we have out in this wilderness but God?
Mhm.
Okay, maybe I went too far off, but
Yeah, well, yeah,
when you were talking about spirituality and land and
right. No,
I
I
kind
think
of went there.
that I love the idea. Yeah, when you're talking about landscape, it's altar, and I think that's a conversation to be having one at
Okay.
some time in the future, uh, because it still brings it home. And so I'm bouncing around, but the idea of going to the Hebrew to the Hebrew story, and in the desert, is that how to make it, the idea of making it sacred, having it there, and so an interrelation of stories. But I guess what I'm getting at is, see, the wilderness and the desert. All right. And so, right, to me, I always like the thing is desert,
Yeah,
wilderness, deserted, you know,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's a place that so often folks find as unwielding and
Mm,
fearful. And so the thing is I think the more that folks get settled in, the less fearful it is. That the folks
okay.
who live in the midst of it are not. So this is what I'm saying is, to me, is considering earlier in say that Exodus story, is that you have Moses, right, who spends all this time with his father-in-law Jethro, this priest, that
Yeah, 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 yeah.
pushes
Yes, yes.
pushes this, in my opinion, pushes this city boy to think about this desert landscape in a radically different
Okay.
way than he did when he was in the city
Yes,
in
yes.
Egypt. And and but the story, talks about him moving out across a wilderness,
Yes.
right? But for him, he had no fear in leaving folks and heading out across with sheep and goats,
Yeah.
across the wilderness, and ending up in a place where he decides to climb a mountain and ends up having this phenomenal conversation with Bush, right? That he was comfortable in that space because it was his space. It had finally become his space. And that becomes the piece in the Exodus story is how do you is that right? He spends this radical amount of time, but let's say 40 years with
Mm,
father-in-law in the
yeah.
desert, learning it, becoming comfortable with it, understanding it, knowing where water is, knowing where salt is, knowing this space is just another space that you live in a particular way. You just don't live the same way as you lived when you were in Egypt, in the city, in the
Yeah.
metropolis. And that you end up into this movement with a bulk of people who are all from the city. And how do you, in a short period of time, have them settle in and be comfortable with this landscape that looks as if there's nothing there? But that again and again, you come up with
Okay.
all of this food that is lying in the desert. It's always there. You just need to know how to see it and how to know it. And then we look at the Sonoran landscape and migrants who are moving up and across of it.
Hmm.
And so many, especially the further south that you come from Ecuador and Guatemala, where landscapes are quite different than the
Yes.
Sonoran Desert. And finding oneself in a place of turmoil in the moment, that you stand on the side of the road until somebody finds you.
Yeah.
because this is new to you. This is a new space to you. I guess that when you talk about that
Yeah.
spirituality, for me, it would just be so radically different and would tell such a radically different story that that when you show up, that it's not just the individuals that show up, but it is that the government shows up and says, oh, well, we welcome you. Now, what do you need to survive in this space? That we recognize. And so I'm jumping around, but when you go back to those
Yeah,
folks
yeah.
of going, all we want to do is live out our lives and have our children live out their lives that are healthy,
Yeah.
safe, wonderful. I don't know. I think I went around circles a lot
Yeah.
there.
No,
But
it's
that's the
so Miguel de la Torre. Let me say that in Spanish. Miguel de la Torre. Since I already messed up Plymouth, at least I'll get the Spanish right. uh, Plymouth, sorry. Miguel de la Torre says, he tells the story of like, the thing is that all of the like the riches that that made life possible in my homeland, the US kind of went in, took it, and brought it here. And so since I can no longer have a home in my homeland, I'm coming here to get my home. And so there is this piece of that sense of belonging that is attached to the land, to my home, to my culture. Everything is being shipped out to more developed economies. So I like, if those riches were still in my homeland and provide that security and well-being for my family, that's my preference. But since it's being shipped out over here, I'm moving also over here. Since my home is not here, it's I cannot build my home here. I'm gonna build it over here where my resources are being taken. But just going back to this piece that we were talking about, faith and altar. I guess the piece that I was thinking about, or that I often think about, is how faith in that precarious situation, it's literally a matter of life or death. And all you got left is faith, is your faith in God. Faith is not about a national identity, a cultural identity, heritage, if you will, a pop culture thing where, oh, I'm in this church, or I go to this church, I sing these songs, I dress this way, I put stickers in my car that says Jesus loves you. Like, it's not a matter of identity. It's literally a matter of finding God and seeing God, everything around you, like wanting to turn the rocks that are on the side of the road into bread. But since you can't, in your soul, you know that there is this greater power, this greater transcendental energy that will sustain you. for to continue on the journey.
Right, right. Well, I like that. I think that when you go down the faith piece and recognizing it's not a national identity, is that then faith, the richness of it, and then the hard piece that comes for, say, for many U.S. Christians, is getting to the place of going, it's not a national identity, then what is it?
Mm.
And that if it's about finding and seeing God in the space that you're in, is that if it's not a national identity, nor is it a religious identity. And that becomes
Yes.
a kicker for Christians.
Yes,
In
yes.
this particular landscape, because it goes back to the Tohono O'odham story,
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
Christianity does
Mhm.
not know this landscape.
Yeah.
This landscape, the faith, the story, the understanding of God in this landscape can only rise up out of the landscape itself. So if you don't know the O'odham story, then you cannot have you can have a belief. So perhaps it's how we want to define our terms, but here's how I'm going to play with it. You can have a belief, you're going to have a Christian belief, but a faith that's built in God, you can't pull from the Christian story. You have to have the O'odham story. It's not that there's not aspects and massive pieces within the Hebrew story that ties to it. It's just that if you don't have it, you don't know the soil in which you stand.
Yes.
That has to be a part of the story in which you live. So whatever landscape in which you are on, to know the indigenous story of that place.
Yeah.
The myths, the understanding of creation, their understanding of God, whatever term that they may use, you got to have that to build a faith that is meaningful to the place in which you find yourself.
Yes, that is not alienating you from the land in which you are, right? But rather it's helping you like become a part of the landscape.
Right. We should all be able to find ourselves. We all need the ability to be able to sit down on the soil, lean up against the tree,
Yes.
lean up against whatever is there, lean up against a sand wash bank, and experience that place.
Yeah.
Without words, without conversation, that it just rises up out of the land and becomes a part of it. And again, to me, it's when we remember that we are the soil, no matter where we come from, to sit down. And again, for me, it is in that space. The last time I was there, to be able to go out and sit down in a sand wash in the early morning.
Yeah.
The soil within your body is having a conversation with the soil of that place.
Mm.
And if we can get out of our head and get out of the intellect and allow the body to be itself, really it's eternal self, right? That which was far before we were born and will be long after we die. To allow it just to be, the land will speak to us. But we have to allow it to do it, to be able to have the faith that I think is the richness that we all would like.
So to bring us back, Dave, thanks so much. This is such a delightful conversation, and if I could, I would take all the time you can give me and continue to record and talk about all these pieces. But I just want to be mindful of you probably needing to pick up hay and feed your flock, your sheep. um, so couple of pieces to wrap it up. One, for on September 27th, we're gonna go visit this mission. And the interesting thing, right, is that it's this very neat, well taken care a place that is now a national park. So you can pay $10, or you can bring your annual pass, and then you're good to go. So in a sense, we're going to be surrounded by nature, because it really is a beautiful space, and we're going to be next to grass and mesquites and adobe brick walls, and yet it's within walls, and it's like this landscape has been designed, like it's almost like an architectural design around what it used to be one of the oldest Father Kino's mission in the Pimeria Alta, in this area. And the other piece, so follow right after that conversation we're going to go down to the border, and we're going to stand next to a wall, just to let our bodies experience that oppression, because we're going to be standing in a militarized zone, and everything around us is going to tell us that. But at one point we were talking about boarding schools and Christian missions, and the parallel, how we see a lot of that happening again, particularly during the Trump administration, where kids were taken from their parents right there at the border. And for some folks that was a new thing, it was a horrible thing, and yet not knowing or not remembering that this has been happening in the States for since the country, the United States, has been pushing borders west until it reached the ocean, and now is pushing it south, and the wall here at the U.S.-Mexico border is just a symbol of a border that continues to extend all the way down to Central America and even South America. And yeah, so I didn't know if you'd like to share some of some of the pieces that we've been in conversation about, but also you experiencing, like, being in this place and talking a little bit about that.
Right. I think right during,
or some of the parallels you've
we
seen happening with the separation of children from their parents, and what your reflection has been as director of the Yakama mission.
Right. Yeah, I look forward to our time
I guess those are two very loaded subjects. So one was the mission, the other one was the border. Whatever you want to pick on. Yeah,
well, I think they come together, and I think that when we gather on the 27th and have these conversations, we can definitely go a lot deeper on it. But at its core is, yes, I think that many of us looked at what went on at the border during Trump administration and the separation of children from their parents, and and many folks wanted and did call that out. I think that what gets lost in it is not reclaiming our own complicity in it. And so it's just to say that, again, labels, we can have a whole conversation around labels and the problematic with labels. And we have this piece that, we have labels of blue states and red states, conservatives and liberals and progressives. We have all of this, and folks center it around political identity so much. And yet I think for the church and folks within the church, within the Christian church, and so that I think that's the main one for me to call out is recognizing how much we participated in this. So in the United States, is that there is not a mainline Christian denomination that in one way or another at least had individuals that supported slavery, which was literally supporting the commodification of people, having children literally ripped from parents' hands and sold off as if they were cattle. So the idea of chattel slavery, that is a conversation I never heard come up during the border. I didn't hear one denomination say, we understand what's happening at the border because we have supported this in the past.
Okay.
I didn't hear one denomination, and I'm talking about myself.
Yeah.
Right? My own people did not come out and say, we supported as a denomination that identified in some way or another as a frontier movement, as a Western movement, of the removal of indigenous children from their parents at 6 years old and being put into boarding schools, that we supported this removal of children from their parents. Again and again, we miss.
Yeah.
As people of, now, do I use faith of belief? how do we go about that? But how do we miss as people of faith of being able to turn to our peers and say, what I see going on at the border when children are removed from their mothers, I can speak out against this because this is what I did. Yeah. I participated in this evil yesterday. I own it. I know that I took Black children and sold them off into slavery. I know that I ripped the children out of mothers' hands and put them in the boarding schools, that the deep evil that is there, I did it. So today I can turn and say, this is wrong and this is evil because I know it intimately. So let's have that conversation right now, so we end this right now so it doesn't happen again. But because we've been taught so well in the United States to always be right, to not talk about where we massively mess up, we go, it's them.
Yeah.
So it was Trump. Well, no, it wasn't Trump. It was US people who did that. Me included, because I allowed it to happen. However, everything happens to get to that point. Obviously, I didn't do what needed to be done. To make sure that didn't happen. That's on me. That's not on folks who follow Trump. It's not on Trump. It's on US people. US people did that. It's not to say that US people didn't, that there's plenty of US people that yelled at the borders and said, this is wrong. Bottom line is when it happens, it's my government doing it. And I have to claim that.
Yeah.
And to unclaim that is to unclaim a lot of other things that, for the most part,
Yeah.
we're not willing to give up, because we like our fast food, and we like our car, like our comfort, and
We like our one-day deliveries.
that's right. And until we're willing to give up some stuff and recognize that so many of these are not what I or my children need, but they're just privileges and wants.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh,
we will continue taking children from their parents.
yeah.
And that's the greatest fear, is that it's not a one out. It's something that just keeps getting repeated until we turn and look at Empire and say, we've got to cut that stuff out.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Wow. We're gonna close it here. We're gonna wrap it up here. Thank you for that powerful way of we're gonna leave it as a segue to to continue this rich conversation IRL, in person, in real life, on September 27 and 28. So folks, this a little bit of an hour conversation. It's just a teaser to what we're looking forward, that it'll be a transforming experience for all of us, being in the land and bringing all of our bodies, our spirits, our minds, our thinking to continue to dive into these critical, hard topics, but that we need to deal with, and be in that place of discomfort. Yeah, I guess the invitation we want to make to folks is to come and be willing to feel discomfort, and just be there in that space of discomfort, and leave from there with an energy to say, what am I going to do about this? And so come out of this with things that we can do to change some of that. Because, migrant bodies, brown bodies, black bodies, we live with this discomfort all of our lives. So, and the wall and the border and the policing of these lands always reminds us of always, it nudges that that discomfort. So all righty, thank you so much, Dave, for taking the time to record this piece, to share with folks a little bit of your experience, of your scholarship, of your wisdom, and yeah. So folks, join us at the event on the 27th. Follow us on our social media, hit like, check out also the Facebook page of the Center for Indigenous Ministries. There you can find more information and more resources about all of this that we are talking about. Dave, something else that you would like to say, if folks want more information about you, about your ministry, about your work, how can they contact you?
Right. I guess there's a couple places, but be aware that, like you said, is Center for Indigenous Ministries. So you can find us on Facebook, and there's a website out there that you can also find. That's just .org, and locally here on the reservation up in Yakima, Washington, we have Just Living Farm, and you can find that website as well, where we do we have these conversations. That the whole idea is that certainly we raise hay and cattle, kind of like what you were talking about, and goats. um, but more so is that it's called Just Living for exactly that reason. Is that it's a place for anybody to come to have conversations of justice, and so always welcome around that. But it's this stuff right here that we've talked about for the last hour, is that we need to talk. We just simply need to talk. We need to learn how to have conversations, and move beyond dialogues, and be able to converse for days and weeks on these topics, because they should be a longer piece of what we do and what we say.
Amen to that. Alrighty, this is it. Bendiciones, mi gente. God loves you. And see you next time. Thank you, Dave.